Dr. Adrian Wells knelt in the damp soil of the biodome, the air heavy with the scent of earth and the rhythmic hum of alien insects flitting around strange, luminous plants. He brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead, the beads of sweat collecting there, mixing with the cool, persistent mist. The dome's artificial ecosystem had been thriving for years, but it was still a delicate balance. Each plant, each creature, was an experiment, a test in humanity's ability to restore and preserve. His fingers carefully traced the jagged edges of a crystalline flower, its petals shimmering in hues of violet and silver. A soft chirp broke the silence. An insect, one of the many genetically engineered species, took flight with a sound like chimes in the wind. Adrian glanced up, a faint smile touching his lips as he watched it disappear into the towering ferns, then went back to his work. This was what he did. This was where he felt at home, among the living things humanity had rescued, transformed, and nurtured back into existence. But just as Adrian was about to catalog another specimen, his console buzzed. The familiar chime startled him. He wiped his brow and stood, stretching out the stiffness in his joints. The holoscreen blinked to life, displaying an urgent message. The language was unfamiliar, but the words "galactic disaster" stood out in sharp relief. The Klythen. He paused, his fingers hovering above the screen. The Klythen were an ancient race, known for their technological mastery and long-standing traditions. Adrian had studied them briefly during his academic years. Yet, despite their technological marvels, there was an air of mystery about them, as though they had learned too much too quickly and had forgotten something critical along the way. "Dr. Wells," the envoy's voice crackled through the speaker, a cold electronic hiss cutting through the static. "We need your help. Our homeworld is dying. The ecosystem has collapsed. You are humanity's best hope. You are our best hope." Adrian's heart skipped a beat. He blinked, his mind racing. The Klythen were renowned across the galaxy for their advanced technologies, terraforming, genetic engineering, building self-sustaining environments in inhospitable places. But the message was clear. Their world was failing. Even with all their power, they were vulnerable. He shut off the screen. His hands were shaking. The Klythen were asking for his help. The same Klythen who had once looked down on humanity's primitive methods. The same Klythen whose pristine, orderly systems had always been viewed as the pinnacle of galactic achievement. But now their world was decaying, and they were turning to him, a biologist, a human, a species that, until recently, had barely managed to save their own planet. Adrian exhaled slowly, the air thick in his lungs. He had spent years on Earth, working to restore the fragile ecosystems that humanity had nearly destroyed. His successes in the biodome were proof that with enough time and patience, nature could be coaxed back to life. Yet, he was haunted by the failures, the deep scars that remained on the planet. Could he really help the Klythen when humanity had failed to protect their own world for so long? He stood up, his boots scraping the smooth floor of the biodome. The walls of glass stretched upward, and outside the Earth's skies were bathed in the soft light of early evening, the city beyond a backdrop of jagged green hills. He watched the subtle play of clouds as they drifted over the horizon. Could he leave all this? Could he leave the sanctuary he had built, the work that had taken so many years to perfect? "Adrian," came the voice of his assistant doctor, Sarah Langley. She stepped into the room, her brown eyes sharp but concerned. "What's wrong? You look distracted." Adrian didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the console again, at the Klythen's plea for help. The weight of it pressed down on him. What if this was the chance humanity had been waiting for? The opportunity to prove that they weren't just survivors. They were stewards of life. They had failed in the past, but could they redeem themselves? "Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse, "I've been called to help the Klythen." She frowned, glancing at the flickering screen. "The Klythen? You mean the species that practically invented terraforming? Why would they need your help?" "They're struggling," Adrian replied, his tone careful. "Something happened. Some galactic disaster is affecting their homeworld. Their ecosystem is falling apart. And their advanced technology isn't enough to save them. They want me to help them rebuild. Sarah crossed her arms, her brow furrowing. I don't understand. They've got the best technology in the galaxy. Why do they need us? Adrian ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of his thoughts pressing down. Because their technology isn't enough anymore. Something's gone wrong, something they can't fix, and they've asked for me, not for our tech, but for our methods, the organic methods we've developed. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to concern. And you think you can actually help them, after everything we've gone through, after all the mistakes we've made? Adrian swallowed. I don't know, he admitted, but I have to try. Hours later, Adrian was standing before the Klythen delegation. The room was dimly lit, the air cool, and the weight of the moment pressed down on him. The delegation was imposing, tall, reptilian figures clad in flowing robes. Their eyes, glowing faintly with an inner light, studied him with cold detachment. Dr. Wells, said the head of the delegation, a Klythen elder named Vectar. His voice was deep, resonant, and unsettlingly calm. We are aware of your primitive methods, but we have little choice now. The catastrophe that has ravaged our world cannot be undone by our technology alone. You are our final hope. Adrian stood tall, forcing his mind to focus. I'll help you, but we'll need to work together. My methods will require patience, something that may not come easily to your people. Vectar's gaze was unwavering, and Adrian could almost hear the unspoken skepticism. You speak of patience as if it is a luxury we can afford. Adrian met his eyes. Sometimes, it's the only luxury we have left. As the Klythen explained the dire state of their world, Adrian's mind raced. How could he help them? Their planet was dying. The disaster was spreading. Fast. Time wasn't just a luxury, it was running out. Then, just as Adrian was about to ask for more information, a small, unexpected detail caught his attention. A young Klythen stood apart from the group. Larix, a biologist, his scales a lighter shade of green than the others. His eyes were filled with curiosity, a silent understanding radiating from him. For a brief moment their gazes met, and Adrian saw something in Larix's eyes, a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the Klythen hadn't completely given up on humanity. But that would take time, and the clock was already ticking. The message was clear, but it had only just begun. As Adrian boarded the shuttle that would take him to the Klythen homeworld, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. There were too many questions, too many uncertainties ahead. Yet, as the shuttle rose into the stars, leaving Earth behind, Adrian couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He had been given a chance, one that could either save a species or doom them all, and the universe was watching. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere of the Klythen homeworld with a violent jolt, the sheer force of re-entry pressing Adrian against his seat. The starboard side window revealed a decimated planet, a world once lush with towering forests and vast oceans, now marked by craters and scorched landscapes. The Klythen had failed to save it, despite their advanced technology. Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that his arrival, carrying nothing but human-made hope, was as much an act of desperation as it was one of salvation. The shuttle's hum settled into a soft buzz as it descended into a clearing near the planet's capital. Below, he could make out the wreckage of what had once been a thriving city. The air was thick with the stench of ozone and decay. Radiation levels were high, and the atmosphere was toxic even for the Klythen, whose species had once thrived in such conditions. Adrian felt a lump form in his throat as the shuttle's landing struts touched the cracked earth. "Welcome to Klythen," said Larix, his voice calm, yet filled with an unmistakable edge of urgency. The young biologist had been the first to greet Adrian when he arrived, his bright green scales glinting under the harsh sunlight. "This is what's left." Adrian nodded grimly, his boots making a soft thud as he exited the shuttle. He squinted against the harsh glare of the sun. Above, an orange sky filled with swirling clouds painted the world in a sickly hue. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a fragile, dying stillness. "How bad is it?" Adrian asked, eyes scanning the horizon. Worse than we feared, Larix replied, his voice tight. The radiation from the galactic collapse is spreading faster than our reactors can manage. It's choking the life out of our remaining resources. The ecosystems are collapsing, and even our own technology can't stop it. Our terraforming systems are barely functioning. Without them, the world is fading. Adrian took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had seen environmental collapse before, but never on this scale. His methods had worked back on Earth, tiny patches of biodomes, struggling cities, but this was something far beyond what he had ever imagined. A dying world once teeming with life, now withering under the weight of its own history. Where do we start? Adrian asked, focusing on the task at hand. Larix led him through the ruins, the ground beneath their feet cracked and uneven. Adrian's boots kicked up dust as he walked, the air thick with the scent of ozone and ash. A strange silence clung to the land, as if even the winds had abandoned this place. We'll need to evaluate the environmental systems first, Larix said, pointing to a series of tall towers in the distance. That's where our terraforming core used to be. It's barely functional now. The radiation levels are high, and our technology is dying. Adrian nodded. Then we'll have to improvise. Larix's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. Improvise? How can you possibly think that will work? Our systems were designed for precision. We don't have time for mistakes. Adrian glanced at him, an edge of frustration creeping into his voice. If you have a better idea, I'm all ears, Larix. You've had all the precision in the world, and look where it got you. If we don't try something different, this planet won't survive. Larix hesitated, the tension between them palpable. He was young, idealistic, but Adrian could see the cracks in his confidence. The Klythen had spent centuries perfecting their technology, relying on it as the key to their survival. Now, as that technology crumbled, they had no idea how to adapt. Adrian moved forward, his mind already racing with possibilities. He didn't have time to argue. Humanity had learned how to survive by adapting, by using what they had, not relying on what they wished they had. It wasn't about precision. It was about resilience. They reached the crumbling structure of the terraforming core. The metal walls were scorched and twisted, and the once pristine machinery lay in ruins. Adrian ran a hand over the surface, feeling the dull, cold metal under his fingertips. He felt a pang of guilt for what the Klythen had lost, but he couldn't dwell on that now. We'll need to start from scratch, he said, kneeling beside a broken console. This is where your systems failed, but we can still work with it. Larix watched him, the skepticism still in his eyes, but he remained silent. Adrian had no illusions that the young biologist was on his side, yet. He had seen the skepticism in Larix's gaze ever since their first meeting. The Klythen didn't trust humanity, didn't trust anything that didn't align with their rigid technological approach. Adrian wasn't sure if Larix even fully trusted himself. Help me gather materials, Adrian said. We'll need soil samples, native plants, anything that might still be alive. We'll work with what you've got. Reluctantly, Larix nodded, and the two began collecting samples, scouring the area for whatever remnants of life they could find. The silence between them stretched as the hours passed, the work hard and unrelenting. The Klythen's world was a hollow shell, a broken dream that had once reached too high, too fast. Adrian could feel the weight of the task pressing on him. Every decision counted. Every step they took could either save the Klythen or damn them further. As he worked, he couldn't help but think back to Earth, the failures, the mistakes, the hope that they'd managed to salvage something from the wreckage. He had to believe that the Klythen could do the same. Let's set up a test zone, Adrian said, his voice sharp with purpose. We'll start small. Bring in the plants and species that are still thriving, even if it's just a few. We can rebuild from there. Larix seemed hesitant but nodded. Together they began laying the groundwork, utilizing the most basic of tools that to Adrian seemed archaic compared to the Klythen's on-advanced technology. But the more they worked, the more the doubt in Larix's eyes began to fade. Slowly, He started to see what Adrian had known all along. Survival wasn't about perfect technology. It was about flexibility, adaptability. Nature's cycles, though harsh, could be the ultimate guide. Just as the sun began to set over the broken world, casting long shadows across the barren landscape, a sudden frantic beeping from the console caught Adrian's attention. He glanced at Larix, his heart racing. "The radiation levels are rising faster than we anticipated," Larix said, his voice tinged with panic. "We have less than 24 hours before the core collapses completely." Adrian looked out at the vast, ruined expanse. There was no time left for mistakes. They had no choice but to push forward. "We need to act now," Adrian said, turning back to the task at hand. "If we don't make progress today, tomorrow may be too late." And in that moment, as the orange sky burned above them, Adrian knew that whatever happened next, there was no going back. The heat from the dying planet pressed down on Adrian as he stood in the center of the makeshift camp, sweat dripping down his brow and mixing with the dust of the Klythen homeworld. The air was thick with the stench of charred earth, and the faint, acrid smell of ozone clung to every breath. The ground beneath his boots seemed to tremble, as if the planet itself was fighting to keep its fading life intact. In the distance, the crumbling remains of the terraforming core loomed, silent, defiant, and failing. It had been 20 hours since Adrian and Larix had begun the restoration efforts, but the task was overwhelming. Despite their best attempts, the radiation levels continued to rise. Their test zone, an experiment in human terraforming techniques, was barely holding together. Adrian's hands were raw from working with tools he'd never used before, the weight of the Klythen's expectations heavy in his chest. The younger biologist, Larix, had grown quieter, his initial skepticism replaced by something more dangerous: fear. The air crackled with the hum of dying energy, the wind a dry, bitter whisper that scraped against Adrian's skin like sandpaper. His stomach churned at the thought of what might be coming next. It was as if every movement they made was one step closer to a precipice. Larix approached, his face gaunt from hours of work, his eyes bloodshot and wide with strain. He didn't speak at first, just gestured toward the horizon where the orange sky seemed to pulse with a foreboding glow. "Adrian, the radiation it's reaching critical levels. The core is failing faster than we predicted," Larix said, his voice tight. "We need to leave. Now." Adrian clenched his fists, the weight of the decision suffocating him. He had promised the Klythen that he would help, but every plan seemed to unravel with each passing hour. The humanity he represented, the methods they had perfected on Earth, were proving to be no match for the Klythen's once pristine systems. His confidence faltered as doubt gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. What if they were wrong? What if he was wrong? "I can't just leave, Larix," Adrian replied, his voice low but firm. "If we don't stabilize the radiation levels here, your entire world, your people, will be wiped out. I'm not running from this. Not now." Larix took a step back, his tail twitching with frustration, his claws clicking against the rocky ground. "You're talking about saving us, but look around, Adrian. Nothing is working. What do you think your methods can do that our technology hasn't already failed to do?" Adrian's eyes narrowed. The words hit harder than he'd expected. He knew the Klythen had always seen humanity's methods as crude, chaotic, natural, in the worst sense of the word. But the Klythen's pride in their technology had blinded them to their own failures, and Adrian, for the first time since he'd arrived, felt the full weight of that disbelief settle like a heavy fog in his chest. "Your technology has failed," Adrian said, his voice steady but laced with bitterness. "You've spent centuries perfecting it, and look where it's gotten you. My people might not have the precision you have, but we know how to survive. We know how to adapt." Larix looked at him, the words sinking in. For a moment he was silent, his gaze distant, as though the full magnitude of their situation was starting to land. The wind kicked up again, swirling around them, carrying a sharp, almost metallic taste in the air. Adrian could see the fear in Larix's eyes, the unspoken question of whether humanity had truly found a way to save them, or whether this was yet another desperate gamble. We don't have time for philosophy, Larix said, his voice wavering. The radiation, it's already killing off the last of the species here. We have to abandon the surface. There's no point in staying. Adrian shook his head, a cold determination tightening in his chest. He could see it, the fear. The Klythen had always been the rulers of their destiny, relying on their precision, their logic, their cold calculations. But now, in the face of a planet's collapse, it was humanity's instinct for survival that had to take precedence. He couldn't back down now, not when they were so close to finding the solution. "We can't give up yet, Larix," Adrian said, grabbing the young biologist by the shoulders, his eyes locking onto Larix's in a moment of fierce intensity. "I know you're scared. I am too. But this is our chance to show the Klythen, show the galaxy, that survival isn't about being perfect. It's about being able to adapt, to move forward even when the world seems to be falling apart around you." Larix didn't respond at first, his gaze flicking to the ruins around them, to the dying landscape. Then slowly he nodded, his expression hardening. "Fine," Larix said, his voice low. "Let's try one last time, but if we fail, Adrian, we're dead. And there's nothing you or anyone can do to change that." Adrian's heart beat in his throat as they moved toward the makeshift terraforming setup. The air felt heavier now, as though the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final act to unfold. They began adjusting the equipment, filters, soil generators, water purifiers, each action done with precise movements, an unspoken understanding passing between them. But even as they worked, a distant rumble shook the ground beneath their feet, sending a tremor of unease through Adrian's body. The core was failing faster than expected. "Adrian," Larix said, his voice tight. "Something's wrong. We're running out of time. It's happening too fast." Before Adrian could respond, a blinding flash of light erupted from the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The ground quaked beneath them, a violent shudder running through the camp as if the planet itself was screaming in agony. Adrian's pulse quickened as he turned to Larix, his throat tightening with dread. "Get to the shelter! Now!" They sprinted toward the underground refuge, the distant noise of crumbling rock and collapsing infrastructure echoing in the distance. The sky above them seemed to warp with a strange, unnatural energy as the radiation levels spiked. Adrian pushed forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but the fear settled deep in his chest. He could feel it now, the weight of the Klythen's history, their failed attempts to control the uncontrollable. As they reached the shelter entrance, the door slammed shut behind them with a heavy thud. The room fell into eerie silence, the hum of the shelter's energy systems filling the void. But outside, Adrian knew the true disaster had only just begun. And as the Klythen homeworld's last defense flickered on the edge of collapse, he realized the truth. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology. It was its resilience. And whether or not it would be enough to save this world was still to be seen. The Klythen's future rested in their hands. But could humanity's hope survive the unraveling chaos of the galaxy? Only time would tell. The shelter was dim, its walls humming softly with the steady pulse of machinery struggling to maintain the fragile balance between life and death. Adrian's breath echoed through the room, a ragged sound that matched the rising panic in his chest. Outside, the Klythen homeworld's surface had become a living nightmare, fractured, unstable, and dying. The radiation spikes continued to worsen, and the ground trembled beneath them, as if the planet itself was being torn apart. Adrian's fingers tightened around the cold metal of the shelter's control panel, the hum of the machines flickering in and out like a warning. "Larix," Adrian said, his voice strained as he turned to the young biologist standing beside him, staring at the flickering screens. "We need a plan. We need to—" "I know," Larix interrupted, his voice hollow with disbelief. "I know what we need, but we've tried everything. The radiation's too strong. The terraforming systems can't handle it." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling in his chest. "Then we do what we can with what we've got. We can't sit here and wait for it all to collapse." His voice rose, fueled by urgency. "We have to act now, Larix. We don't have time for perfect solutions. Larix's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. The young Klythen, once so filled with doubt, now stood at the edge of acceptance, as if the last shred of hope was clinging to him like the final ember of a dying fire. He had no choice but to believe that Adrian had the answer, even though his heart trembled with the fear that it might not be enough. "All right," Larix finally said, his voice tight. "What's your plan?" Adrian paused, scanning the room, taking in the dim glow of the shelter's walls, the sterile, metallic scent of the air. He could feel the oppressive weight of the Klythen's failure pressing down on them, but he couldn't afford to be paralyzed by fear. Not now. "We need to get to Earth's sanctuary," Adrian said, his voice calm despite the chaos outside. "It's the only place left that can show us how to save this planet." Larix blinked in confusion. "Earth's sanctuary? But the place we've been working to preserve extinct species," Adrian said, his words carrying an urgency that made Larix's stomach churn. "It's a model of what we can do when all seems lost. I think it holds the key to saving your world." Larix's confusion deepened. "How? The radiation is too high. How do you expect to get there?" Adrian clenched his jaw. "We don't have a choice. If we don't find a way to adapt your people, your world, they're finished. We have to move quickly. I can guide you to the sanctuary, but we'll have to brave the irradiated zones to get there." The words hung in the air, each one thick with the weight of their consequence. Adrian could feel his heart racing, the cold, biting air of the shelter pressing against his skin. Outside, the rumble of the dying world was louder now, a constant reminder of the short time they had left. But Adrian knew, deep down, that this was the only chance they had. Larix's gaze faltered, uncertainty clouding his eyes. "And if we don't make it? What then?" Adrian turned to face him, his voice steady. "Then we've lost everything, but we won't know unless we try." The journey through the irradiated zones was nothing short of a nightmare. Adrian and Larix moved through the desolate landscape, the air crackling with static and the acrid scent of burning ozone. The once thriving Klythen city, now nothing more than a skeletal ruin, loomed behind them. The ground was charred and cracked, and the distant hum of decaying machines was a constant reminder of the world's descent into oblivion. Adrian's boots crunched on the dry earth as they navigated the rubble-strewn streets, the radiation slowly eating away at their equipment, the heat of the planet pressing in from all sides. Larix walked beside him, his once pristine scales now dull and smeared with the grime of their journey. His face was taut with fear, eyes darting nervously to the horizon, as though expecting the ground to collapse beneath them at any moment. "What happens when we get to the sanctuary?" Larix asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "How will it help us?" Adrian didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed ahead, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger, any hint that they were still on the right path. "The sanctuary was built to preserve life in the event of extinction-level catastrophes," he said, his voice calm but filled with a hard determination. "It's not just about technology or science. It's about adapting, using nature's own resilience to survive." Larix's voice cracked. "But this is different. We're not just saving a species or a few plants. We're saving a world." Adrian turned to look at him now, his gaze hard but understanding. "I know. But sometimes survival isn't about perfect systems or flawless technology. Sometimes it's about how we adapt in the face of total destruction. It's about learning from nature's mistakes." As they reached the outskirts of the sanctuary, the air shifted. The stench of decay faded, replaced by the strange, rich scent of fresh growth, of life fighting back against the odds. The clearing before them was illuminated by a soft, golden light, a sharp contrast to the toxic landscape they had just crossed. The sanctuary, hidden beneath the dying planet's surface, seemed to pulse with life, as though it was a world of its own, untouched by the disaster above. Adrian's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, the crunch of dry earth beneath his boots replaced by the soft, damp soil of the sanctuary's garden. He inhaled deeply, taking in the vibrant alien flora that surrounded him. Plants with colors and shapes he had never seen before, their strange beauty a sharp reminder of what they had almost lost. "This," Adrian breathed, almost to himself, "this is what we can do." Larix stood beside him, his mouth open in awe. But how? How did this survive? Adrian turned to him, his face lit by the soft glow of the sanctuary's bioluminescent plants. Because it's not about perfect solutions. It's about finding a way to coexist, to work with nature rather than fight it. This place was designed to preserve life, not through technology alone, but through harmony, through balance. Larix's eyes widened. "And we can do this for our world?" Adrian nodded slowly. "Yes, but it won't be easy, and it won't be quick. But if we use what we've learned here, we can rebuild, together." The air seemed to still, as if the sanctuary itself was waiting for them to make their move. The Klythen's fate, their very future, rested on this moment. Adrian could feel it, the weight of everything they had worked for, the weight of hope itself. "We're not done yet," Adrian said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We've got a world to save." The wind howled outside, but inside the sanctuary, the light of life pulsed stronger than ever. Adrian knew that this was just the beginning. They had found the answer, but the real work was only just starting. Time was running out for the Klythen, but Adrian had finally found the key to their survival, and now it was time to unlock it. The wind was biting as it howled across the barren wasteland, carrying with it the acrid scent of decay. Yet within the sanctuary, Adrian felt something he hadn't in what felt like a lifetime: hope. The walls of the biodome hummed softly, a gentle vibration that seemed to pulse with life itself. The faint scent of damp earth and the sweet perfume of alien flowers filled his nostrils. He inhaled deeply, savoring the cool air as if it could somehow wash away the weight of the world outside. The sanctuary, hidden deep within the Klythen's planet, was their last chance. It wasn't perfect, but it was thriving, alive with the vibrancy of nature working in harmony. The plants here, alien and terrestrial alike, grew with an exuberance that defied the collapsing world above. They had built something incredible here. This place was a testament to the belief that life could, if given the right environment, flourish in the face of near-certain extinction. "Is it really possible?" Larix asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The young Klythen biologist stood at Adrian's side, his eyes wide, drinking in the sight of the thriving garden around them. He still had trouble believing it, even as his fingers brushed the lush leaves of an alien plant that had been extinct for centuries. Adrian placed a hand on Larix's shoulder, his fingers trembling just slightly. "We can do this. We can save your world. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. But if we use the principles we've learned here, we'll find a way." The weight of Adrian's words hung in the air. He could feel the exhaustion in his bones, but there was something else, too. Something that burned deep inside him. A purpose. The knowledge that this could be the turning point, not just for the Klythen, but for humanity as well. Their survival depended on this, on what they could create together. Adrian glanced at the glowing bioluminescent plants that lit up the sanctuary with their gentle hues of blue and green, casting long shadows on the floor. The sound of the gentle hum from the sanctuary's life support systems filled the air, punctuated by the occasional rustle of leaves as the plants adjusted to the warmth of the interior climate. The sanctuary was an oasis in the storm, and Adrian could hear the beating of his own heart in the silence that surrounded them. The constant reminders of what was happening outside, of the dying planet and its inhabitants, faded into the background as he allowed himself a moment to savor this fragile peace. "I've been thinking," Larix said, breaking the silence. "Your methods, they are not just about survival, are they? There's something more to it, something I didn't understand until now." Adrian turned to face him, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" "The way you approach life," Larix continued, his voice soft but thoughtful. "It's not about control, it's about balance, about learning to coexist with what's around you. My people, We always tried to dominate nature, to perfect it. But now I see it's not about perfection. It's about adaptability. Adrian nodded, feeling the weight of Larix's words sink deep into his chest. There was a profound truth in them, one that humanity had only recently come to understand. Perfection was an illusion. The real strength lay in the ability to adapt, to grow, to find solutions when the world seemed to be falling apart. That's the key, Adrian said, his voice low, almost reverent. Survival is not about control. It's about learning how to work with what you have and finding a way to make it thrive, even in the most hostile conditions. We've learned that on Earth, just as you're learning it now, but it's only the beginning. The sound of footsteps interrupted their conversation. Adrian turned to see Tevrik, the hardline faction leader, walking toward them, his face expressionless as always. But this time there was something different in his eyes, a glimmer of reluctant respect. "You've proven something," Tevrik said, his voice carrying a weight Adrian hadn't expected. "Your methods, they are unconventional. But I see now why you insisted on this approach. Perhaps we were wrong." Adrian straightened, meeting Tevrik's gaze. "It's not about being right or wrong, Tevrik. It's about survival. We're all in this together now. The Klythen, the humans, everyone." Tevrik nodded, his features softening ever so slightly. I can't deny that we've reached a point where unity is our only option. The radiation levels are still rising, but we can no longer rely solely on technology. We must embrace this adaptability, and we must do it quickly." Adrian felt a surge of emotion rise within him, relief, hope, but also the deep weight of responsibility. The Klythen were finally starting to understand, to see beyond their technological pride. But the journey wasn't over, far from it. Together they walked deeper into the sanctuary, toward a central chamber where the remaining Klythen leaders had gathered. The room was vast, filled with tables and screens, the faint hum of machinery blending with the whisper of the plants that thrived within. The Klythen elders looked up as Adrian and Larix entered, their eyes wary, but no longer filled with the same mistrust they had once held. "The sanctuary is working," Adrian said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. "But it's not just about saving this space. We need to expand it, bring more of your world into it. We can start by using the same principles that have worked here to revive your ecosystems." Tevrik stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Adrian. "And you think this will work?" "I know it will," Adrian replied firmly. "We'll take what's working here and replicate it, adapt it to your world. It's not going to be easy, and it won't be perfect, but together, we can make it work." The Klythen elders exchanged quiet murmurs, their once stubborn faces now showing signs of reluctant agreement. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. There was no longer a question of whether they could survive. The question now was how. As the elders discussed the next steps, Adrian turned to Larix. The young Klythen was standing slightly apart from the group, looking out at the plants that filled the chamber. The glow from the bioluminescent flowers reflected in his eyes, making them shimmer with an understanding Adrian had seen only moments before, an understanding that had taken root in him. "We're not done yet," Adrian said, walking toward Larix. "This is just the beginning." Larix looked at him, his eyes filled with a new sense of purpose. "I know. And we'll rebuild. Together." As the sound of the elders' voices faded into the background, Adrian stood by the doorway looking out at the sanctuary, a symbol of what could be achieved through patience, adaptability, and unity. The Klythen were no longer just a species on the brink of extinction. They were survivors. And in that moment, Adrian knew that humanity, too, had found its place, not just on Earth, but among the stars. Together they could preserve not just their own future, but the future of every life they touched. The wind still howled outside, but within these walls there was a new beginning, a future forged by the fragile hands of nature and the resilience of those who refused to give up. And as Adrian planted the first of many alien seedlings in the soil, the future blossomed, filled with the promise of survival.